It's your friend Will here, and I'd like to take a few minutes to give you a very brief introduction to 15XX, a narrative skirmish-sized miniatures game inspired by the pike and shot Renaissance era. It is a rule set I'm currently writing, designing, and playtesting. And yeah, playtesting a miniatures game, which you need to be in person with other people, is just as tricky as you would think here at the end of 2020 after a year of global pandemic. But playtesting is very slowly moving forward, and I'm at a point right now where I'm comfortable enough with the rules to start to share a little bit more publicly about the project, and I'd love your feedback, would love to get more playtesters, and would love to get more people interested in the fascinating slice of history that this represents. 15XX is designed to be played on a 2x3 tabletop, and right now we are designing this around that space using multi-based 15mm figures. We think that at a snapshot level, as you can see here, gives us a really interesting visual vignette of these raiding parties, of these skirmishers, of these pillagers in a small footprint, which is a nice combination of things, especially when you consider that 15mm is a scale that a lot of historical wargamers play in. So if you're interested in skirmish-sized gaming from a historical standpoint, if you're interested in narrative and role-playing game inspired mechanics with your miniatures gaming and getting that in a historical setting, well, I hope you would check out what I'm doing with 15XX. So here's an example vignette at the table, but let's take a look at what our war bands or our parties end up looking like for a typical game. Now here we see two examples of what a party, which is the term we use for war bands in 15XX, being what we suspect is a more historically palatable, if not accurate term, even though I still call them war bands and you still call them war bands. In 15XX, war bands are set at a small size. You see an example of what is a smaller sized in the number of bases being played warband on your right, and one that's on the larger size on the left. So this is a pretty small skirmish-sized game. Parties are made out of groups, and a group can be 1, 2, or 3 bases, depending on how strong that group is, its weapons, its tactics, and its special rules. There are no points. Bases are designed, fingers crossed, to be roughly equivalent to one another. And it's really just a matter then of selecting your groups and developing a theme from there. Now you'll see as we're looking at this that these are 15mm scale miniatures. The rules are scale agnostic, and I'll be providing recommendations on sizes for the larger 28, 25, 32 mil scale that a lot of us game in. But here are the reasons why I've started this project in 15 mil. One, in the historical wargaming space, 15 mil has been a pretty popular size to build larger forces, to fight larger battles, large skirmish, small battles with. And my suspicion is that there are a lot of historical wargamers out there who have plenty of 15 mil figures available. Two, physical size on the tabletop. As you'll see when we tee up the game board and the terrain, this is being played on a 2x3 space using a large grid system. And before you freak out about the idea of a grid system, I think you'll find that we're handling it in a really subtle and nice way. But the grids have a way of eating up more space tactically with your movement than if you were tracking things millimeter by millimeter or inch by inch. And we wanted to be able to play this game in a small space, even smaller than the 6x4 tabletops that we see kind of being the common standard across the gaming industry. And so 2x3 is a space that you can roll out on your coffee table, roll out on your dinner table, and have a fun gameplay experience with. Third is 15 mil allows us to create these little dioramas by multi-basing figures onto a single base and also accommodate a wider variety of different troop types than you would normally expect to see in a skirmish style setting. That's why you can have small artillery pieces. We have carts and horses, as you see on the right side, and that gives you some dynamic options in what you want to model and represent on the table, which is pretty cool. All of these you'll see here, with the exception of the diorama on the top right, are based on 1.5-inch rounds. That's a consistency choice on my part, but because this is built on a grid system, really there is nothing saying, frankly, that you, A, have to be consistent in your sizing, or really, B, that they do have to be multi-based. However, that is the standard we're using for our playtests and the figures I'm painting and basing for this project, with the exception of what you'll see in the top right of a group option that we call strong points, and I'll speak to that in just a sec. But to summarize, this is being tested in 15 mil. It is built for small parties or war bands that will total in the range of 4 to 12 bases. That is a representation of groups, which are your building blocks of your war bands, and you're just going to select 4 groups when you are building out a war band that could range from all the expected historical troop types you would see in the pike and shot Renaissance era, along with some fun surprises like game and livestock, for example, or physical emplacements that we call strong points, which again, you'll see me speak to here in just a couple of seconds. And here's our second example, a slightly larger, in fact, one of the larger, when you look at base sizes, parties you can create in 15XX. And that is a set of 2 3-base groups and then 2 2-base groups. And so moving left to right, you have a much different composition than the cavalry, strong point, and cart build of the previous party. And here you have, on the left, a group of rabble, which are 3 bases. And then you have in the middle a set of war dogs or possibly hunting hounds. It's a little bit hard to make out the hounds here given the lighting and the contrast I have on the video, but if you look close, you'll see the good boys. And then you have a set of shot, which are 2 base. And then, interestingly enough, we have on the right a set of messenger birds or hunting hawks, which is an interesting little visual addition that I don't think you're going to see a lot of in most historical games. But if you're like me, I think they end up looking really exceptionally cool. And so it's kind of nice to have some visual distinction there, even though it is a bit of a struggle to get the camera to focus. Like every other YouTuber filming battle reports and talking about miniature wargaming, I too suffer from camera focus issues. But there you go, 2 examples. Again, small scale skirmish of smaller figure counts, and even those figure counts are being multi-based. And so it should be an easy thing to step into if you're looking at getting into historical gaming or getting into skirmish gaming from larger historical gaming, or if you're interested in the historical side of setting and genre from fantasy and sci-fi and modern skirmish wargaming. This should be something pretty easy to get into, especially if you've already been exposed to 15 mil scale. Things like Flames of War, World War II set is probably one of the more popular non-historical 15 mil game sets or rule sets. So let's look at the table real quick and give you a quick breakdown of what the basic gameplay looks like. And now we have an example after we have gone past the fog of war, made it through the first contact phases, how an example game could be playing out in the middle of the core gameplay loop, which is a revolving set of 3 phases. We always begin with an initiative phase where there is some bookkeeping around which groups have suffered casualties and are being removed from the table, which groups have been forced off of the table and are returning. One of the other key distinctions there of this game, because it's being played in a small space, and also because of the grid, effectively making that a smaller space than if you were playing with inches and measurements of rulers and the like, that what we see on the board is really the hot, firestorm in the middle of what is probably a broader encounter or two larger forces. And so your groups will be moved off of the table and will be returning throughout the course of an encounter. In fact, this idea of movement and maneuvering around the board is really a key part of the gameplay experience. What you will also notice here is that there are additional markers involved in the game in addition to the bases of your models. And so we have examples of casualty markers here and over here, and then there are also treasure or loot markers here, and then this one's hidden behind the wagon as it is coming off the hill downhill. But the casualty markers are what's important for that initial initiative phase. Once the initiative phase has been moved through, players bid on who gets to move first or second using the set of tokens that we used in the Fog of War phase. Then we move into the maneuver phase, and 15XX uses a modified you go, I go approach rather than alternating individual activations back and forth. And the idea there is we want to model that all of this this maneuver, this action is all happening simultaneously. And so by allowing one set to move all of their bases and the other player to move their bases, and then we move into the action phase where each base is given an opportunity to have a single action. There isn't the frustration of seeing if your troops activate or not and then not being able to do anything if they don't. You will be able to act. It's just a matter of, are you going to be successful or not? And that's where the dice mechanic comes in here. The game runs on a D10 dice pool system of 1 to 4 dice. The basic mechanic is being run off of a set of comparative numbers, an X versus Y mechanic, where X will be a stat at a party level describing your group's overall disposition, quality, and characteristics. And that number is the number of D10s you roll versus a group level stat, which is your target number. And you're going to try and roll low. It's a roll under system. When it comes to modifiers in the game, we have designed this to be very straightforward, very simple, and hopefully very easy to remember. So for every action in the game, whether that is giving fire, whether that is taking cover from fire, whether that is parlaying with your enemy, everything else, the list of modifiers has been radically streamlined to a single trigger, a single context that will give you a +1 bonus. That +1 is an additional die roll. So easy to remember. You're not scrambling and looking through long lists of charts of possible modifiers and trying to add up multiple modifiers and stack things. It's super quick playing, super fun at the table, involving a lot of dynamic movement. And the gameplay, the victory conditions, is really built around this idea of Renaissance and early modern and pike and shot skirmishes and raids, these small scale actions on the peripheries of larger battles, of sieges, of the town to town, noblemen to noblemen, mercenaries run amok, preying on farmers and villagers in between larger wars. These hot little incidents that have been lost to time, or people's names that have been lost to history, but is really trying to model what was a real lived experience for untold thousands of people in the late 1400s through the mid 1600s. And we're trying to do that in a way that is fun. And that's really the challenge here, is how do we represent history in a way that is engaging, that is faithful to our understanding of that history, but at the same time provides an entertaining experience for people to play, but then because it's a miniatures game, also to collect and model and paint and base their own small force. And so our goal is hopefully to achieve that. And so to provide a space, if you are interested in historical wargaming and want to get into something smaller in a skirmish size set, to give you a space for that. But also if you're interested in a more narrative and role-playing game inspired set of rules, mechanics, and just overall vibe to your skirmish wargaming experience, to give you that and to be able to give that to people who are interested in historical wargaming that might have had to go out to other genres like fantasy gaming, sci-fi gaming, to get that narrative fix. And so we want to bring that into the historical wargaming space and do it in the period of the pike and shot era, because we think that there's such a wide range of interesting character types and troop types that you can bring to the table, that it's not just a monolithic, homogenous force of muskets and versus muskets, riflemen versus riflemen. That there's a lot of variety that you can see play out, but then also, again, models a really fascinating time in history. So that's 15XX at a glance. We're in the process of playtesting, which is, as you can imagine, hard in the era of COVID-19 when we're trying to be very responsible. But my hope is to get feedback from the next playtest I run over the holiday season 2020 and release a more public playtest in early 2021 in January. And if you are interested in historical wargaming, if you're interested in the pike and shot era, if you're interested in narrative skirmish gaming, if you're just interested in history and have been curious about miniature wargaming, well, I'd love your feedback. I'd love your input. Feel free to check out the blog, tabletop.willphillips.org. I'll also be posting about this occasionally to Facebook. So follow me both places. And if you're interested in providing feedback, if you're interested in playtesting, please, 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 please do reach out.